Merry Meets, welcome to my channel. I'm Anna, a clinical psychology doctoral candidate. This channel is dedicated to real-life applications to psychology, so if that is something you are interested in and you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell notification button and also the like button if you enjoyed this video. You might be wondering, why am I wearing a fluffy hat today? And honestly, I don't know. I bought this hat and I liked it, so we're going with it today. Today we will be talking about how comparison-based self-esteem is not a sustainable source of self-esteem. This is inspired by something I read in The Charisma Myth by Olivia Cabane. I've already made a couple videos inspired by her, so check those out. I will put cards up here and I will also put those in the description box if I remember to. So in my experience as a therapist, I'm just going to describe how I would define a couple of terms based on the literature. Self-esteem is really about holding yourself in positive regard. For example, I believe that I'm a good student, a good person, attractive, etc. Good self-esteem is a protective factor against a lot of things. It's good to have good self-esteem. It protects you against depression, it helps you cope better, it's associated with more prosocial behavior, better stress management, fewer risk-taking behaviors, and overall better well-being. So self-esteem, it's good to have. Now, confidence is more of a sense of security in the positive regard that you hold for yourself. So something like your skills or your looks and so on, which usually shows up in behavioral ways, such as standing tall, speaking up for yourself, making eye contact. The way I see it, self-esteem is like the panels of wood that make a cabin, and confidence is the glue, if cabins were made with glue, I don't know, the glue that holds those panels together. Without something of substance, be they values, skills, etc., confidence is pretty useless and superficial. It doesn't put a roof over your head, so to speak. Without the glue of confidence, you have the ingredients of a beautiful cabin, but it's always falling apart because you don't have that glue. So the way I think about it, self-esteem and confidence really go hand in hand. You have to have things to feel good about yourself for, and you also have the confidence to keep that up to get a sense of security in your high self-esteem. But Olivia Cabane has kind of a different take on self-esteem. She says that self-esteem is all about comparison. And I gotta say, this is to an extent true, at least in the way that a lot of us think about self-esteem. Anytime you value yourself with something tangible or measurable, you are essentially saying, I am proud of myself because I'm better than those who are not as good as X, Y, and Z. I am proud of myself for getting a 93% on this as opposed to the median of 84. Or if the median were actually 97, I assume you would not feel as proud of yourself. Let's say that you're doing a class project with someone and you realize you're more well-read on a topic than they are. Your self-esteem then goes, I'm a good student, I'm proud of myself. But it's comparison based because your point of reference is someone who has less than you. Or let's say that you find out that your partner works with an attractive person and you reassure yourself with the knowledge that you're more attractive and you also have a better personality, so your partner will not fall in love with this other person. It's still comparison based. You're essentially saying, I have self-esteem or I have confidence because my looks and my personality are superior to this person's. Now I have to mention, I kind of disagree with Olivia Cabane that self-esteem is completely comparison-based. I think this is a type of self-esteem and certainly a very common and superficial type of self-esteem that's sold to us very often. Psychologically, when we define self-esteem, it usually takes into account a sense of fixed worth that doesn't just depend on measurable things, a sense of having worth simply because we have worth. And you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with comparisons? Yes, I try to be the absolute best version of myself, and I have a right to feel proud of how far ahead from others I am. And of course, I myself am a person who's very perfectionistic and ambitious and competitive and wants to be number one at everything, but this cannot be our only source of self-esteem because there will always be someone who has it better than us. Even if you're in the top 1% in terms of looks, intelligence, skill set, talent, whatever it may be, there are billions of people in this world, and there's bound to come a moment when you come face to face with someone who you objectively look at and say, they're better than me in terms of all these different things. If you pride yourself on intelligence, one day you may come into contact with the modern day Einstein and realize that you are not superior in terms of intelligence. If you pride yourself on your looks, one day you might come across Monica Bellucci and realize that you're not the most beautiful person in the room. If you pride yourself on your ability to do your job excellently, one day you may meet the person that is going to change your industry with their insights, and you are not going to be able to feel as good about yourself in terms of self-esteem. Now, I've suggested on this channel before that we base our self-esteem primarily on our code of values. And I do stand by my argument that this is a good idea, or at least better than other sources of self-esteem. However, even values can lead to comparisons. When we say I was empathic today, we are still assessing our empathy in comparison to other people's behavior and disparaging those who showed less empathy than us. It's great if comparisons motivate us to do better, but like I said, it's shaky to base our entire self-esteem on comparisons. Comparison-based self-esteem feels great when we are comparing ourselves to people who are below us, but not so great when we're comparing to those who are above us on the food chain. And some of us tend to do this more than others because some of us have this cognitive bias where we only compare to people above us, which usually leads to perfectionistic tendencies and leaves us feeling inferior and inadequate, such as people with body image issues often have this cognitive bias where they only look at people who are skinnier or more muscular or more toned or whatever. They never really look at people who are below what their goals are. Another issue with comparison-based self-esteem is that although yes, there are certain ways to measure things upon which we pride ourselves, out in the real world, everything is subjective, and we tend to base our self-perceptions on other people's perceptions of us. For instance, when I get an interview, I feel great about myself. When I get a rejection, I feel like shit about myself. Our self-perception depends a lot on how other people perceive us. And while most of the world might agree with us that we're very good at something or above the bell curve, there are bound to be people who sometimes disagree with us, who perceive and estimate our worth to be lower than we'd like. For example, maybe you scored high in agreeableness on a personality test, and you pride yourself on being very agreeable and you think that objectively speaking, you are agreeable. But maybe your boss thinks you're actually very disagreeable. Maybe he's always comparing you to a colleague who finds to be much more warm, pleasant of a presence. Or maybe you know that you're objectively very attractive, but when do you come across someone who doesn't find you attractive? That person is comparing you to others and has ascertained that your right to self-esteem about your appearance is lower than you'd hoped. So even if we objectively look at certain things and say that we're above the bell curve, there can always be people who don't agree with that. And what happens when we come across someone who is better than us or someone who thinks that we're not that great? We kind of have a few choices. We can either delude ourselves into thinking we're actually better than them, which is essentially the way that narcissism works. We can let our self-esteem crumble, or we can find a more sustainable basis of our self-esteem. So what is that alternative? What is that more healthy self-esteem source that isn't comparison-based? According to Olivia Cabane, that is self-compassion. If self-esteem is, I feel good about myself because I'm good at this, self-compassion instead says, I feel good about myself because I intrinsically deserve compassion. Not because I did anything right or earned it, but because I'm a living being, because I have worth simply because I exist. Here's where self-esteem tends to bleed a little bit into spirituality. Studies do show that having some kind of spiritual belief is correlated with better self-esteem. However, we have to be careful not to jump to any assumptions here, because one study actually found that this is only true in cultures where religiosity is valued, suggesting that spirituality only protects self-esteem if spirituality is something that is positively promoted within your culture. References in the description box, by the way. Regardless, it stands to reason that if you believe you have worth and you deserve to be here regardless of the reason, you are going to be able to treat yourself with greater compassion. If you simply don't have a spiritual worldview and you believe the world has no meaning and you have no fixed or intrinsic worth for being in it, here's an alternative way to think about self-compassion that doesn't feel too limiting to you. You might want to reframe this from, I deserve compassion because of, insert my spiritual worldview, to instead, I deserve compassion because I have to live with myself, and like it or not, the research shows that I have to somewhat like myself in order to have the most fulfilling life, and I want to have a good time while I'm here in this meaningless existence, so I better start learning compassion. Because studies do show that self-compassion increases feelings of connectedness, decreases anxiety, depression, self-criticism, improves relationships, improves your ability to handle negative events, and even improves your immunity. A common pushback to this when someone suggests self-compassion is, well, you don't want to just pity yourself or just wallow in complacence. People think that if you treat yourself with forgiveness and kindness when you make a mistake, you will somehow become complacent. And actually, no, self-compassion has been shown to decrease self-pity. When you're giving a presentation and you mess up, if you're basing your whole self-esteem on comparisons, you might think, God, I did so awful, I need to do better, I'm so stupid, no one else has done this. But if you're giving a presentation, you make a mistake, you treat yourself with self-compassion, you might instead think, I made a mistake, but everyone makes mistakes. I'm only human, I still deserve compassion. I need to treat myself with compassion in order to live with myself, so I might as well do that. Now you tell me, which one sounds more like self-pity? The one where you're lamenting how terrible you are and how you'll always be a failure, or the person who quickly recovers from a mistake because they treated themselves with compassion? What's the bottom line? How can we apply this information in day-to-day life? How can we integrate some self-compassion into our self-esteem along with comparison-based self-esteem if that's something we want to cling to? You can strive to be the best version of yourself, not the best version of someone else. If you're an able-bodied person, do you think that someone who has a physical disability shouldn't feel good about themselves because you can walk faster than them? No, of course not. Although we all have things that we're better or worse at than others, what matters is if we can be the best versions of ourselves, not the best version of someone else or the best version compared to someone else. A really great example of this is supervisors in clinical psychology. The goal of good supervisors in psychology is to make trainees the best psychologist they can be, not to make trainees the same type of psychologist that they are, not to impose their own theoretical orientation, their own interventions, their own approach to therapy. No, they approach supervision with the mindset of, how can I help you do better at what you do, as opposed to how do I make you do things more like me? So regularly check in with yourself. How could I be better at being me? How could I do better at the things that I want to do, the things that I'm good at? How can I use the tools that I have to my benefit instead of how could I be like this other person or how can I be better than this other person? And I do stand by my belief that values can be a great way to foster healthy self-esteem, but again, in a way that's not comparison-based. This could be the difference between saying, I value hard work, I feel good about myself for working harder than my peers today, and saying, I value hard work, I feel good about myself because I worked hard today. Not in comparison to anyone, but just compared to what I could have accomplished. And that doesn't make me better than my peers who didn't work hard because they might have completely different values or skill sets or different limitations. It's not about imposing your values on everyone else or feeling superior to others because you're abiding by your specific values. It's not about making someone feel bad because they gossiped and you find gossip to be against your particular values. It's not about thinking that you're better than everyone else because of religious piety. It's just about getting clear on what your values are and trying to live in accordance with them because you are the person that has to live with yourself, not anyone else. And because it benefits you and because there will probably never be someone else out there who has the exact same constellation of values as you do. That's what's unique about you, and that's how you can be the best version of yourself. I actually do have a whole video on compassion for yourself and others with some more concrete tips for self-compassion, and that is based on Heatherash Amara's book, Warrior Goddess Training, so I will again put a link, I think, up here. So check that out if you want some more hands-on concrete tips for self-compassion. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please subscribe and like the video or comment, whatever you feel comfortable doing, and I will see you in a few days.